Yesterday at 3 p.m., right here at this street corner in Soho, Muslim Brunson, a man with a long history of serious mental illness and an extensive track record of violence, stabbed a 25-year-old woman in the neck right here in broad daylight. I'm keeping May Berg, an inspiring costume designer who moved to New York to pursue her dream of becoming a costume designer, as well as her family, in my thoughts and prayers as she remains in critical condition. I'm praying for her and for her speedy recovery after this senseless act of violence. This preventable tragedy once again lays bare our city and state's broken mental health, homelessness, and criminal justice systems, which time and time again let people like Muslim Brunson fall through cracks over and over and over again without adequate mental health treatment, without adequate evaluation, too often leading to tragic moments just like this one. This incident is just one in a string of violent events that make all of us feel less safe, whether we're riding on the subway or walking on the streets of our neighborhood or out in broad daylight in neighborhoods like Soho. Earlier this year, a woman who was herself homeless and mentally ill was lit on fire and killed in a subway car. Every time it happens, it rattles the sense of safety that New Yorkers need and deserve, and it calls into question those systems of mental health care, of criminal justice that we count on. It's unacceptable. It's a failure of both city and state government to keep us safe and to get mentally ill people the treatment that they need and deserve. That's why I've made confronting the crisis of mental health and homelessness my number one priority in this campaign. My Safer for All plan will stop people with serious mental illness from cycling from subway to street to hospital to jail, and too often right back again to incidents like what happened here. That requires dramatically improved management and coordination across city agencies. That requires expanding options for both voluntary and mandated treatment, including, and I want to be clear about this, increased flexibility for involuntary commitment, as Governor Hochul is seeking. And that requires a housing first approach that has proven effective time and again at connecting people with serious mental illness to stable housing and the services that they need. This plan could have prevented yesterday's tragedy. Muslim Brunson was released from prison having violated a mental health court sanction by shoving an NYPD employee onto the subway tracks. And at no point since his arrest does it appear that he was provided with adequate mental health evaluation or services. Not while he served his prison sentence, not upon his discharge in August of 2023, not when he was arrested again for public lewdness in January of 2024, and not throughout his parole or when he was released from parole in February of 2024. At any of those times, with Brunson's full medical and behavioral history in hand, he could have been assigned to an assisted outpatient treatment or AOT program, which is mandated mental health outpatient treatment. He could have been connected to supportive housing and services, or if medical professionals had concluded, especially upon discharge, that he was a continuing danger to himself and others, as he obviously was, they could have sought court approval to have him placed in a state psychiatric hospital. Unfortunately, they did none of those things. That's why I agree with Governor Hochul that we must increase flexibility for involuntary hospitalization and commitment. The existing law does not require consideration of an individual's full medical history when evaluating that situation. So individuals like Brunson are released, even though the state and the city have full knowledge of his history. And yet they don't pay attention to it. So they didn't evaluate that at the time of his discharge. They didn't evaluate that at the time of his arrest for public lewdness. They didn't evaluate that when he was released from parole. So amending our laws to require consideration of an individual's full medical and behavioral history, it could have helped to prevent this tragedy and kept Megan Berg from being stabbed here yesterday. Now, let's be clear, more than that is required. Former Governor Cuomo's cuts to Medicaid, gutting the city and state mental health infrastructure, and failing to build enough supportive housing for people has contributed significantly to the mental health and homelessness crisis that our city faces today. Governor Hochul has taken a good step in proposing 100 forensic psychiatric beds and putting it in the budget that are precisely for people like Muslim Brunson to be in secure detention while getting adequate mental health services, something that we persistently fail to do. Better discharge planning is also needed, especially for people like Muslim Brunson, who are being released from prison after having failed to comply with mental health court sanctions. And I really want to focus on this. Mental health court is a critical part of this system. So when someone has been found guilty of a serious crime, their sentence can be suspended if they comply with their mental health treatment program. Now, in this case, he did not. And so rather than continue with that mental health sanction, he wound up upstate. He gets to the end of that sentence, having failed to comply with his mental health treatment program. And obviously, what should have happened on discharge is that someone says, okay, let's look at the entirety of his history. We know he failed to comply with that program. Before we release him back into New York City, let's figure out what he needs and have mental health professionals who should be there to provide that assessment and say, this is an individual who could succeed back in the community with supportive housing and services, or this is an individual who we can release but needs to be mandated to an AOT program, or this is an individual who continues to be a serious danger to himself and others, and we need to seek to keep him in a state psychiatric institution. That should happen upon discharge of a person who's being released from prison, having failed to comply with a mental health court sanction. It did not happen here. It must happen in the future. Now, all of this needs to go along, as I have emphasized over and over again, with a housing first model that offers people housing and services. Because let's be clear about this as well, 70 to 90% of the time, housing first works to keep people with serious mental illness stably housed with the mental health services that they need. And with that model in place, the vast majority of people won't need to go down the path of involuntary or mandated treatment. So 70 to 90% of the people you see in the subway, homeless with serious mental illness, if connected to housing and care, they won't be there. They will be in stable housing with services. They don't go down this path. They don't wind up in prison. They don't wind up like Muslim Brunson on this street corner. And to keep it straight, my plan to end street homelessness also includes the creation of a dedicated team at City Hall, which would meet weekly with me, with agency commissioners, and with key service providers to review the status of people like Muslim Brunson, the top 50 or 100 people who are most acutely at risk with serious mental illness and a record of violence, so that together with the mental health professionals and with a real review of their history, you can make the right decision about where people need to wind up instead of continuing to have them cycle from subway to street to hospital to jail to prison and then right back here to corners in Soho, where they do grave harm to our neighbors and to people like May Berg. That's why the city created that list for the express purpose of tracking those cases. Unfortunately, Mayor Adams has failed to do anything meaningful with it. We can do so much more to prevent incidents like the one that happened on this Soho street corner yesterday. With changes in Albany and with real attention from City Hall, we can make New York City safer for all. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to take some questions.
Mr. Lander, given the recent violent attack in Soho yesterday, how do you balance the need of public safety with the rights of those facing a mental health crisis, and how does your Safer for All program help address this sensitive issue?
Thanks so much. Yeah, look, it starts with this Housing First program that recognizes that 70 to 90% of the time, people with serious mental illness who are homeless need housing and services. And if they get it, they don't have to go down the path of mandated treatment or involuntary hospitalization or mental health court. And we're totally failing to do that. I mean, the Adams administration over the past 6 months removed 3,000 people from the places that they were sleeping on our streets and got zero of them connected to stable housing. So right now we have a housing last model that fails people mostly without even trying. But look, when you have the information to know, as we did with Muslim Brunson, that someone is a danger to themselves and others, then mandated treatment is necessary. What that requires is real mental health professionals evaluating the situation and determining whether they need to be hospitalized involuntarily. And when you're actually going to say, as we should have when Brunson was released from prison, this might be someone who needs to continue to be held in a secure facility, that requires going to court and persuading a judge. It is absolutely possible to use the information we have to protect people's civil rights while also recognizing when people are a genuine danger to themselves and others. And that's exactly what my Safer for All plan will do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lander.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you? So you talked about this person. He was in and out of the justice system. And I don't know if discovery laws have anything to do with this particular case, but
How you doing? Nice to see you.
it's not a leap to think that maybe someone this case has been dismissed hasn't been able to get this mental health treatment, and that's also something that is holding up the budget in Albany. So, do you have any comment on that?
I mean, this case to me, to the extent it's related to the Albany debate, is just all around involuntary hospitalization. And I think that arrest, I mean, for public lewdness is the best example. That's a situation where he was arrested, where the city had the information to know that this was someone who was presenting a danger, and the law does not require a consideration of full circumstances. So for this case, I mean, I'm glad to, on discovery, I think there is room for a deal that will address the issue that many more misdemeanors have been dismissed post the discovery reform. But that's not what the case was with Muslim Brunson. I mean, we had all the information we needed to get him on a safer path and one that would have prevented the attack on Mayberg.
In terms of what you could do as mayor, I understand that legal piece in Albany are probably others, but
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on this issue, but I've written a little bit about it over the years. And it seems like this mayor has thrown kind of extraordinary resources on the streets to try and deal with it. You're saying connections are really being missed.
Oh, yeah.
Zero people
Look,
out of 3,000 actually been connected with.
I mean, a couple
How do you
weeks.
care? But here's
Yeah.
my question.
Okay, sure.
We've been talking about this issue for decades, but intensely for like 3 years. Why is this? It sounds like a lot of plans, but like the issue is people have already fallen through the cracks, right? And it's going to take a long time to fix all those cracks.
Yes.
Why do you think that this plan and you would do a better job of
Yeah.
actually helping people get care that they need in a very immediate way?
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you a story, and then I'll answer your question. I went out a couple of weeks ago with one of these intensive mobile treatment providers. So since I released the plan, I've gone out with the Scout team, the Subway Co-Response Outreach team. I've been in mental health court. I've been at a day treatment program. And I went out with an intensive mobile treatment provider. That's the program that is supposed to be providing services on the street precisely to the most at-risk folks like Muslim Brunson. And we went through the list, and I'll give you two examples of just where people are falling through the cracks in unacceptable ways. So one caseworker talked about a person who, for 3 months, they had secured a supportive housing unit. About a person who they had secured supportive housing for 3 months, but they couldn't get HRA, a city agency, to change the zip code of the person's prior address. And so they were living 3 months extra on the street. And I was like, don't you have someone at City Hall to call to fix this? And they're like, no, the city agencies are totally disconnected. And then there was another individual, more like Muslim, who was at Woodhull Hospital. And this was something the INT teams knew. They had helped that person get there. And the person, according to them, had said themselves, I'm not safe to go back out again. I'm going to harm someone if I do. And yet Woodhull was about to release them right back to the street. And again, I said, don't you call someone at City Hall. That's an H&H hospital. And say, no, look at this again and consider whether this person needs to be referred to a state psychiatric hospital. And again, they said no. So, like, this mayor is good at talking, but he's not good at implementing. And they have not implemented a continuum of care that actually addresses the places people are falling through the cracks. And you can even see that here. I mean, yes, it was the state that should have done the discharge planning, but it's the city that made the lewdness arrest and could have seen this. So changes in state law are needed. But what's needed at City Hall is a mayor who will pay real attention and meet weekly and make sure there is a czar in place to answer those calls from the different agencies. And then we're not tracking the right outcomes. Like right now, I honestly don't know what outcomes Eric Adams and his team are tracking about these issues. They sweep people. They can tell you how many people they swept. They can't tell you how many people were connected to housing. They can't tell you how many people were connected to services. And fair enough that they need strengthening of the involuntary hospitalization law. That's an area that we agree. But they're not keeping clear data on what the outcomes are that we need. And that is the kind of mayor I will be. I've got this plan in place. Its outcome are end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness, and you'll be able to watch the numbers. Its outcomes are when we're doing involuntary hospitalization, we'll give you the numbers, but I also want to know what happens on the back end, because if they just come out of hospital right back onto the street, what good is the system? What people need, what we need right now is a mayor focused on results to make the city safer.
Can I ask one more?
Of course.
I'm sorry to address this issue, but I'm curious what you thought of the speaker's proposal to basically give direct income. It's not exactly touching the same issue, but a different subset of chronically homeless, unhoused individuals. I don't know if you saw that.
I'm sorry, I did not yet
Okay,
get to look at that in detail. I
I
apologize.
don't have the details on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, the housing, I mean, I'll just say two things here. The housing first model has proven effective 70 to 90% of the time in places like Houston, as the Times reported, in Denver, in Salt Lake City, and an effectively coordinated continuum of care that blends housing first with mandated treatment and focuses on outcomes is what New York self-evidently needs to solve the problem of the mental health crisis that played out on this corner yesterday.
I have a question. So actually, in the Times, there was an article about permanent housing, which seems kind of like what we were talking about. And the thing is, like, we have a housing crisis, right? So there are some units that I understand are available and
Yes.
haven't been put into the system. So first
Yeah.
off, how would you do that? Coordinate that, and then the fact that there just isn't enough housing, and there might be pushback from other people that need housing that aren't mentally ill.
Yeah, so today there are about 2,000 people with serious mental illness who are unsheltered, sleeping on the streets or subways. And there are 2,500 vacant supportive housing and SRO units approximately in the city that those people aren't eligible for because we don't have this housing first model. We have a model that's sometimes called treatment first or housing ready. I call it housing last. And what we're saying to these folks today is we can take you to shelter. So that's what outreach workers offer. They offer shelter. A lot of these folks have had bad experiences in shelter. They don't want to go to shelter, and so they stay on the street. The change that is the housing first model says to them, you are eligible to go right now to a room of your own, to an apartment, a supportive housing unit, an SRO, with the services that you need. And people take that option a much higher percent of the time. We saw that here in New York City when we did it for veterans 15 years ago. We saw it during COVID when people got rooms of their own, and it's been working in cities around the country. People take the offer much more often, so they get off the street. And of course, like, no one can stay on their medication or get well while they're sleeping on the street. So it has proven effective. So for this specific problem, those 2,000 approximately people, we have the supportive housing units. Now, of course, we need to build more supportive housing, and we need to build more affordable housing. And I have a plan for 500,000 units over 10 years, including genuinely affordable and supportive housing, working with supportive housing providers. But for this specific problem, which I think most New Yorkers would agree is the most acute one, we can move forward today.
Do you have any plans for when you? I don't know if it's getting ahead already, but how will you provide services once you have those?
Oh yeah. I mean, let me be clear. Even though they call them out, we call the model housing first. It's a housing plus services model, and we actually have in the report a pretty detailed outline of what services are coming with the person, because if they've got that intensive mobile treatment team, they have some services connected to them. What services are already contracted for? The supportive housing units come with contracts for behavioral and psychiatric services. There are some additions that are needed, like I went to see Fountain House, which is a great clubhouse program where people go during the day. That's a model where a lot of people were peers, people with mental health histories themselves are helping folks who are, in crisis and coming out of crisis. But honestly, even for what you wind up spending on those services, New York City we estimate that it'll cost $100 million in year one and then $30 million a year after that. But we'll start saving money pretty quickly because hospital and jail are so damn expensive that this model not only will make the city safer and more humane, but actually it'll save the city money over time as well.
So
Can I just ask one question? On your mandate, when you say mandate, are you going to put that into action? Because right now, each person on the street has the right to say, we have the right to live on the streets. And that's a problem in itself for me.
So this is, I mean, you're not a member of the press. You're just a New Yorker who cares about these issues, which is great. I'm going to let you have this question. So no, I mean, honestly, you're showing that people care about this issue. Um, yes, I mean, this is the balance we're talking about. I mean, the best thing is to offer people housing with services and for them to take it voluntarily. And a lot of the time they will, and we're not offering it to them. Right now we're saying go to shelter. When you give people an apartment with services, it's shown that much more of the time they'll take it. Now, that doesn't work all the time. Like I say, it works 70 to 90% of the time, but that leaves 10 to 30% of the time when it doesn't. And yes, part of what I'm saying today is we need a change in state law for increased flexibility for involuntary hospitalization when someone is a danger to themselves or others, or can't take care of themselves. And that is part of what I'm proposing today. So, all right.
I want to know that you're going to say Elizabeth Street Garden, and you're going to find a better space to put in
All right.
affordable housing.
That's another press conference. So,
Okay.
all right.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
one. All right. Best of luck on the race.
Thank you.
okay, one last question.
Sure.
Are you worried about
No, that was great.
Are you worried about Trump, like the tariffs, the cuts, and how you're gonna fund this program, in that eventuality?
Well, I'm worried about Trump and the tariffs and the chaos that he is causing in the economy and for our budget and in the world. And I think anyone with eyes to see is worried about that. So, and look, I'll be honest, the budget uncertainty that's being created is, could have a big impact on the city's budget. Now, I hear just since I came down here, the tariffs are off again. So, but look, I mean, those tariffs could very easily, unfortunately, tip the economy into a recession. That would have a very damaging impact on the city's budget and make it very difficult even for us to maintain the current level of services we have, much less grow new programs. I'm worried about all those things. And as controller, I'm paying a lot of attention to where the markets are. Pensioners don't have anything to worry about. Our retired teachers, cops, and firefighters' pensions are secure. But when the markets are down, it creates a lot of economic and fiscal stress. So all those things are true. That said, this plan I will implement in my first year as mayor, and it will save the city money. It is responsive to what is one of the most felt needs of New Yorkers right now. We spend so much money on hospital and jail and programs that aren't working. This is going to work more effectively. So lots of worries about Trump, but it's not going to get in the way of ending street homelessness for people with serious mental illness and confronting the mental health crisis in New York City.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For all my questions.